Welcome to our webinar on navigating uncertainty. My name is Tony Carlton and I'm the Director of Corporate and Professional Education at Macquarie Business School. Our previous webinars have looked at various tools and frameworks that help individuals, teams and organisations respond and adapt to a rapidly changing external environment. We continue that theme today. Our presenter, Dr. Elizabeth King, has had a successful business career, mainly in pharmaceuticals, and is now a consultant in leadership development and coaching. She has a PhD from Macquarie Business School and is also an Adjunct Fellow. Carl Crafoord is a successful entrepreneur who has also achieved success at the highest level in yachting, having been a navigator in 4 winners of the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. In a world impacted by volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, 3 key capabilities for successful leadership are resilience, the capacity for collaboration, and the ability to lead in complex conditions. During times of high individual and organisational anxieties, leaders need to manage their emotions, empathise with others, focus more readily on issues at hand, adapt to the situations they find themselves in, and take broader perspectives into account. So how do leaders manage the ability to choose at crucial times, whether simply to observe what they are thinking, feeling and sensing, as opposed to reverting to autopilot? Elizabeth is going to lead us through recent research on the use of mindfulness to help leaders and teams respond in times of uncertainty to these 3 leadership challenges. Despite plenty of anecdotal support from leaders who have tried mindfulness, the current support for it derives mainly from research conducted in clinical contexts that don't really resemble modern organisations, which is why I'm delighted to have Elizabeth joining us today. She'll share insights not only from her research with organisations, but will introduce Carl, who will take you through how these research-based leadership techniques helped him and his crew achieve success in the uncertain and challenging waters of the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. I would now like to hand over to Elizabeth and Carl.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Liz and I'm delighted to be here to discuss this well-timed topic of navigating uncertainty. It's a topic of my thesis on leadership. It's a topic of my current research agenda, and it's a topic top of mind for most of us at the moment. And given the currency of this topic, as we spend our time together today, I encourage you to reflect on your own experience with uncertainty, because the type of skills that help us navigate it, perform in it, and rest in it are embodied skills, and they're developed by reflection. Scholars of this topic of uncertainty, people like Pema Chodron and Margaret Wheatley, tell us that we can't develop these skills by listening to talks like this or reading books, any more than a sick person can get better by reading a medicine prescription, or a hungry person can be satisfied by eating the menu. We need to reflect on the way we think about it, how it makes us feel and behave. Now, the cost of not improving our skills, our lack of resilience to uncertainty, creates stress. And stress is costing the Australian workplace about $15 billion a year. That's pre-COVID numbers. Goodness knows what they are now. And it doesn't matter really what the number is, because it really goes a short way to describing the suffering that's created by our natural attempts to deny the uncomfortable truth of the pervasive uncertainty in our lives. This pervasive uncertainty exists despite the fact that Western civilization has progressed enormously over the last decades. We have far more wealth than we used to have. We also have far greater sense of control over our external environment due to technological advances. But the current COVID situation and the looming climate catastrophe are evidence that we actually have limited control over our external world and a very small capacity to create stability in our own lives. The good news is that we can learn to navigate uncertainty more easily, no matter what's going on externally, by learning to understand our mind. Today, I'm aiming to give you some direction on how to do that by sharing some mental models. But first, a scope alert. For all of us, at times, uncertainty is a delightful adventure. This is evidence of either good mental habits or a good situation. That's not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about how we respond to difficult external circumstances. If we can change our environment to make it more comfortable, obviously we should. But if we can't, we want to try not to make it worse with our mind. So let's look at some metaphors and some models that can guide us. And then we'll look at a case study where these ideas have been applied. And in reality, the test of their usefulness will be if you apply them and they help you. I hope they do. So our first image here is an arrow. It's a single arrow. The idea is for us to do the best we can with our mind to make sure that we only get hit by one arrow. Many of you probably heard the parable of the two arrows. It's a helpful image in times of uncertainty. So the central point in this story is that the wise man asks, if someone's hit by one arrow, does it hurt? And then if they're hit by a second arrow, does it hurt more? The meaning of this story is that in life, we can't control the first arrow. These are the circumstances of life. But the second arrow represents our reaction to the first. And the second arrow can be more painful, and that pain can be reduced. This is the idea that led to the incredible success of using mindfulness as a treatment for chronic pain. That was in the 70s, and the mindfulness revolution has exploded since. Now it's claimed that mindfulness is useful for just about anything, including navigating uncertainty. And it is, but there's more to the story. There's three important mental skills involved in navigating uncertainty. The first is our ability to focus our attention, which allows us to get into the high performance state termed flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, one of the founders of the positive psychology movement. You'll have all experienced flow. It occurs when we're stretched to our limit in the pursuit of a worthwhile and meaningful goal. You might have got there when working, when exercising, maybe engulfed in hobbies. You will get there in some way. The second skill is our capacity to be aware of our circumstances without being engaged in it necessarily. This allows us to keep perspective, which in turn leads to better decisions. And it gives us better control over our emotional state, which in turn gives us better control over our mind. And then thirdly, being able to accept the situation as it is and to be patient if we don't like it. This stops us making it worse, and it enables the clarity of mind that leads to innovation. Now, if we put all those skills together, attention, awareness, and acceptance, what we have are the skills of mindfulness. But in order for these skills to help us in uncertain situations, we need to apply them inside a framework that gives us a clear understanding of the nature of reality. So now I'm going to offer you a metaphor for mindfulness, which acts as a mental model for developing the skills to navigate uncertainty from inside out. Here is the model of the metaphor of the wheel of mindfulness. This diagram represents a wonky wheel. You can imagine something like a donkey cart wheel that you might have seen in Bhutan or Thailand or somewhere on your travels. It's off-center. This one's off-center on the inside rim, and if you like, imagine the outside rim a bit off-center as well. The wheel represents the experience of life as a bumpy ride. Joseph Goldstein discusses this really well in his book on mindfulness. Now, the inner rim represents the skills that we've just spoken about. Let's call them the 3 A's: attention, awareness, and acceptance. This is our ability to focus our attention on the task at hand, our capacity to be aware of what's going on without engaging it, and our ability to accept a situation as it is. Now, to navigate uncertainty, we need to use these skills within a framework that's described by the outer rim. That represents our experience of life and is explained by the 3 I's: impermanence, interdependence, and identity. If we reflect on our lives for any sort of period of time, we notice that everything's impermanent. From our thought to our breath, to our body, to our bank balance, it's all constantly changing. And this happens because everything's interdependent. We're connected to each other, to our communities, to the politics, to the environment, in a large, wonderful, complex, adaptive system. And within this system, many of our troubles arise because we forget it's constantly moving. We have this strong sense. We feel this sense that we're separate. And that makes us attached to our own opinions, and it makes us cling to an idea or desire for stability, which is actually impossible and creates a recipe for frustration. So to develop mindfulness in order to deal with uncertainty, we practice the skills of the A's, and we remind ourselves of the nature of existence with the I's. And for more support, we can add some spokes to the wheels and use these approaches to developing wisdom. So the spokes can represent ideas that are developed traditionally in religions and more recently through positive psychology. This is developing approaches to life that include kindness, patience, equanimity, compassion. Now you'll see in the diagram there's 4 categories within the wheel. These represent different orientations or emphasis of mindfulness, whether we're discussing individual or group mindfulness, with or without these wisdom approaches. So we're going to look more closely at these 4 orientations now, because these help us apply mindfulness at work. So we're going to move from the metaphor of the wheel, which describes how to use mindfulness personally, to the model of the 4 orientations of mindfulness, which describes how we use it at work. Now, the study of mindfulness at work is evolving rapidly. It's a little bit confusing because people use the same words in different ways, but we can cut through the confusion by asking 2 questions. When we're thinking about mindfulness, is it mindfulness of what and mindfulness for what? That is primarily, are we seeking to develop mindfulness of an individual or a group, even up to the organisation, and for instrumental reasons like performance, or more substantial purposes like wisdom? So in the workplace, that means we can build interventions that have one of 4 orientations or emphasis. So if we're looking to build interventions that are targeted at the individual for instrumental purposes like performance or well-being, we call that individual mindfulness. That's one of the quadrants. This is where most of the workplace programs are aimed at now. It's mindfulness sort of divorced from the ethical framework. I call it brainfulness because there's a lot of neuroscience used to justify the work. Then if we wanted to move into a view of mindfulness for the individual with more substantial purposes like the development of wisdom, we'll call this individual wisdom. And this is the focus of most mindful leadership programs. It's when the mindfulness programs that we've just spoken about are embellished with substantial values framework, like adding compassion and selfness to the training. This is more like the traditional Buddhist view of mindfulness, and I like Adjunct word for it, he calls it kindfulness. Then we can consider mindfulness from the group perspective, and that's when we start to look at group perspectives with instrumental goals and call that collective mindfulness. This is the focus of most organisational programs. They are about introducing vigilance to processes, about increasing effectiveness of processes and reducing risk. It's about staying alert to opportunities and trying to avoid mindless routines. These sorts of programs are really helpful in industries of high risk like aviation and mining. And then the final category of workplace mindfulness is when we're looking to develop a group for substantial purposes, and I call that collective wisdom. This is about using mindfulness to develop leadership teams to think together within a values-based framework. No one's really doing it yet at work. Otto Sharma comes close. I'm looking for organisations to collaborate together to develop and trial these sorts of programs. It's about doing things like developing mindful boards or helping leadership teams navigate complex decisions like, say, ethical decisions. So there's a lot of interesting ideas, and now I'd like to share with you how they play out in real life by sharing a case study. In the project we're about to hear about, I was interested in how mindfulness would impact leadership decision-making in real time in uncertain environments. It's quite hard to measure the impact of these programs in any realistic way. We can ask questions, but observing behaviour is a powerful new approach in research. So we observed the behaviour with 2 cameras, and I'd like to introduce you now to the crew of Sail Exchange, who were kind enough to allow themselves to be measured on a bunch of constructs, including mindfulness and wellness. I worked with this crew for 3 months to develop their mindfulness skills. We adapted a program from the Potential Project Workplace Mindfulness Program. We adapted it to sailing. We conducted it with the team as a whole. We had weekly sessions and they practiced daily. All of this was done before the December race from Sydney to Hobart. It's now my absolute joy to introduce to you the navigator and co-owner of Sail Exchange, Mr. Carl Crafoord.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you and from our team as well. I've been having a chat with them lately. Now, this year will be my 35th Sydney to Hobart yacht race, and I've won the race 4 times as a navigator. I've been fortunate also to be director of a public company, and I've built 3 startups and sold them on in the past 30 years. And I currently own 3 digital businesses that are also startups, so I really enjoy that process. And a large portion of my leadership has been on yachts during extreme weather that was not forecasted, and in my businesses facing financial turmoil that was not predicted, such as we experience in these unprecedented times. Now, to win a race or create a profitable business, I've had to bring every one of my teams on a journey, facing heavy headwinds or no wind in either business or sailing, and that there are a lot alike, there's a lot of analogies there, staying true to purpose and ensuring the team are aligned around all the shared outcomes. So last July, we competed in a race called the Sydney to Gold Coast race. It's a 400 nautical mile race from Sydney to Surfers Paradise. Anyway, we started researching what else is available out there to lift our game as we got second in that race, and we thought we had to do a bit better in the upcoming Hobart race, which is in 4 months. So to assist us to achieve those goals, we contacted Dr. Elizabeth King. And working with Liz as a team, we embraced all the concepts and practices she taught us with mindfulness, with both daily meditation and weekly group meditation sessions. Now, this was a big call because we had to get all 10 guys on board, and everyone had to buy into the program because obviously it wasn't going to work with all 10 guys signing up. So that was a good start. And the training worked, and we actually ended up doing, which I found very interesting, we actually ended up doing more mental training than actually sailing in the lead up to last year's Sydney to Hobart yacht race. And from what I can deduce, we're the only ocean racing team to endorse the mindfulness program as a whole. Now, during all this, we created acronyms and phrases as common means to help us focus as individuals and as a team in times of stressful situations, and we want to apply those techniques that Liz had taught us. And these were WIN as an acronym for what's important now. This is to provide clarity doing a job or a task. Slowing down to speed up. This was to prevent multitasking. And my favourite, running a thoughtful democracy, was about not competing the usual autocratic style in yacht racing, which is the norm, but getting everyone to provide input with empathy. So now I want to bring you on board the yacht and our journey as we use these phrases at sea whilst racing extreme conditions. So what's important now, WIN provided clarity during adverse condition when things become frenetic. It was our catch cry for ensuring we were focusing on the most crucial aspect of the race and that task at that particular moment. So we work either as individuals or smaller teams, we call them watchers. And what's important is we had to make sure that every job that was prioritised was completed in the correct order, and we had to constantly prioritise all those tasks. And most importantly, when the person was doing that task, was to ensure that the job was done 100%. When all that's done, everything sits down, and all of a sudden something changes. So now one boat tacks on the boat goes another way, we have to reassess everything again. And it's always a fine line of pushing hard to win whilst trying to be safe. If you think like a racing car driver is racing at the limit, but you could crash any time, leading to a detrimental outcome. And so that's why it's important that all these jobs are completed properly. And as we say, to finish first you have to finish. Now, the second one was slowing down to speed up, was part of our mindfulness training on not multitasking. Now, we all know every day we're guilty of multitasking on land. It's pretty obvious. But at sea, it all becomes a lot different because you're wet and you're tired and you're hungry and you're sleep deprived. So you're always mentally going to try and choose a job that's easier than the tough ones. So therefore, what we trained on was actually making sure that we thoroughly completed each task 100% and not multitask at all. That crew member had to do a job. We had to make sure there was no duplicity or inefficiencies having to check what that person had actually done. Also, part of slowing down, was also simply taking a bit more time to make decisions, whether these were tactical or strategic. So you make the right call on the chessboard. Now, the chessboard is what we call the whole of Bass Strait and the waterway from Sydney to Hobart. It's like all these different moves have to be made. And all those decisions have to be made while fending off sleep deprivation. Because again, we know full well when 2 yachts are sailing, one goes a different way to the other due to the wind direction, one will be right and one will be wrong. They're never equal. Therefore, the one that finished close to the finish line has made the best moves and the best percentage of moves and made the highest percentage of risk versus reward moves. Now, my favourite was running a thoughtful democracy was a phrase we used as we planned all these moves to get everyone's input in the decision-making process. So they not only feel part of the team, which is obviously important, but what is really important, they've all got good experience. They've all done lots of sailing. All the guys are top skilled sailors. So the usual way it works in autocratic style is someone makes a decision, everyone sort of follows that. With the mindfulness training, we sort of changed things around and we ended up with everybody having input, but with empathy, and that was paramount. And this mental fitness allowed us to bond as a team and support each other with a lot more empathy during the adverse conditions. And we all knew it was going to be a long journey with an end point. And so with all of us switched on the whole way together, mentally, we instinctively knew we'd have the best chance and the best outcome and the best result. So I have to say, personally, after immersing myself and my team in the program for 3 months, now I've been sailing for 40 years offshore. We did this for 3 months. There was a major gain. And in the leadership stakes, I found myself listening a lot more than talking and working on my leadership skills harder than ever before. And we also removed a lot of white noise and distractions within our communication channels that usually are there when the weather gets wilder and it's noisier and there's more race testosterone. So through employing mindfulness techniques as a resource for our racing crew, this gave us the tools to improve our performance and provided the team with a mental advantage over our competitors and ensured we were reaching our potential. And the proof's there because it successfully enhanced their performance and the results, and it proved that it worked because we won our division in last year's Sydney to Hobart yacht race. So thank you, Liz, for all your hard work. It paid off.
Before we finish our time together, I'd like to just review where we've been and give you a few tips of some things you might want to do if you're interested in a bit of support to help yourself or your organisation navigate uncertainty. So we started this session by saying that we have limited capacity to control our external environment. And fortunately, the good news is no matter what's going on, we can get more control and learn to navigate uncertainty with greater ease by developing more of an understanding of our mind. We talked about 3 key mental skills for navigating uncertainty: our capacity to focus our attention, which allows us to get into a high performance state; our capacity to be aware of what's going on without engaging, which allows us to maintain perspective; and our capacity to accept things as they are, which allows us the clear state of mind that leads to innovation. We talked about one of the important things to do is to make sure we're only hit by one arrow. We discussed the metaphor of the wheel of mindfulness, which gives us a way to develop our skills personally. And we discussed the model of the 4 orientations of mindfulness at work. Now, by introducing programs along the lines of those 4 orientations, we can do some work which ensures that people are present, leaders are kind, systems are safe, and our governance is ethical. If you'd like to do some things for yourself, then I highly encourage you to take up a practice. There's a number of apps available. You can use the Potential Project app that the crew used, or there's some other apps from the Ashridge Business College, their Mind Time program. We'll be sending you some resources to read. If you're interested in introducing mindfulness at work, I highly recommend you look up my paper on leadership and uncertainty, because it's got a generic competency matrix which relates to all those 4 orientations. And I think it's time to go to questions.
Thanks, Liz. So Liz, can you tell me, what did you observe about the team dynamics in the study that you've done?
That's such a great question. There was an amazing thing to watch in one part of the 4 days and 3 nights that we observed the 2 cameras, one on top of the deck and one below the deck. So throughout the entire race, there was this incredible balanced leadership, which we were talking about in the program. Like everybody was contributing to the decisions. And then in the middle of the race, there was a life-threatening incident, and that process changed. What happened was the 3 leadership, there's a leadership team of 3 people, and they took charge. They took charge to the extent that the rest of the crew didn't even know they were in a life-threatening incident. I discovered this when I interviewed them at the end of the race. So it was an amazing way to watch the flexibility of situational leadership that came out.
Wow. That's amazing insight. So the next question is for you, Carl. The next question is, so Carl, what did you learn about leadership?
Yeah, with the leadership stakes, the thing that really became obvious to me as we did the mindfulness training was to actually do more of it. So I actually let go of the wheel. And what I mean by that is when you're a helmsman or a steerer or an owner, you actually steer the boat and you get to bark orders and it's quite autocratic. So we actually did the whole race from Sydney to Hobart. I didn't even touch the wheel. I didn't even steer my own boat, which is pretty unusual, I can tell you that. So what I did learn is I went into like a CEO capacity. I had to make sure that every move we made was correct and double checking everything we did. So the point is from navigation to weather routing to human outputs to risk assessment, all those things were constantly going on. So I learned to lead from the top and not be involved because the steering is actually another task, it's another input. But I actually ran the boat from the highest level with a real helicopter view, looking down on all the jobs that had to be done at hand.
Fantastic. And I have another question for you, Carl, which is based on that. So how did the crew's interaction dynamics differ during the Hobart race versus pre-mindfulness?
Yeah, well, that's pretty easy. I've been doing this for 40 years and I can tell you that this last Hobart race, it was a lot quieter and there's a lot clearer communication and everybody was thinking. So we had a very, various amount of different weather like you normally do in a Hobart race. And when things got windy and things got dark, and you don't know this, but that actual race, we didn't have any moon, so it was black. You couldn't see a thing. So normally people race to test run because when you're sitting on the deck for hours and nothing happens, all of a sudden everyone gets really excited and starts screaming and yelling. So what we found is everybody was really calm. Everybody was really on. So that was like night and day to me. It was very clear.
Fantastic. Well, you're just proving that mindfulness works.
Yeah, we've done that.
Great. Well, that's the end of our questions for today. So we'll go back to Tony.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Carl. This recorded session will be sent to those of you who registered for the webinar. Our email will also include links to resources that will help you further investigate how you can use the concept of mindfulness at both an individual and team level. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for your interest in this presentation and thank Elizabeth and Carl for their insights. Please keep your eye out for our future webinars and short courses offered by Macquarie Business School. The contacts are on the screen. Otherwise, I hope you all keep well and stay mindful.